There is something uniquely violating about someone baptizing your child in secret. Not just crossing a boundary, but erasing your right to make a spiritual decision for your own baby. In a building full of witnesses who all knew and said nothing. My mother-in-law took my son to a church while I was at work and had him baptized without my knowledge, without my consent, and without my husband's knowledge either. She told the priest I had approved it. She told the congregation it was a surprise for the family. She posted photos online with the caption, "Our little angel is saved." And when I confronted her, she told me I should be grateful. My name is Sofia. I am 29. My husband Marco is 32. Our son Luca is now 14 months old. We are not religious. Marco was raised Catholic but left the church in his 20s. I was raised in a secular household. When Luca was born, we agreed that religion would be his choice when he was old enough to make it. We told both families this clearly. My parents accepted it immediately. Marco's mother Renata did not. Renata is 64, deeply devout, attends Mass 3 times a week, and has a framed picture of the Pope on her kitchen wall. She had baptized Marco at 6 weeks old and considered it a sacred obligation, not a preference. When we told her we would not be baptizing Luca, she went quiet in a way that felt loud. She said she would pray for us. She said she hoped we would reconsider. She said that leaving a child unbaptized was a risk she was not sure she could live with. Marco told her we respected her faith, but the decision was ours as parents and it was final. She nodded. She left. She did not bring it up again for 2 months. We thought she had accepted it. We were wrong. She had only gone quiet the way a river goes quiet before it changes course underground. When Luca was 11 weeks old, I went back to work part-time. I worked Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 4 hours each day. Marco worked from home on those days and watched Luca. On one of those Tuesdays, Marco had an emergency work call that lasted 3 hours. His mother had called earlier that morning and offered to come sit with Luca while Marco worked. Marco said yes without thinking twice. She had watched Luca before without incident. She knew how to care for him. He trusted her. He went into his office, put on his headset and worked. Renata sat with Luca in the living room. When the call ended, Marco came out to find Renata getting Luca dressed in a white outfit Marco had never seen before. A small white gown. Marco asked what she was doing. Renata smiled and said she was taking Luca for a little outing. Some fresh air and a visit to church. Marco said okay and went back to answering emails. He did not think to ask which church or why she had brought a white gown. He did not think about what a white gown meant. I came home at noon. Renata's car was gone. Luca was not in the house. Marco said his mother had taken him for fresh air. I felt something prickle at the back of my neck. I called Renata. She did not answer. I texted. No response. 20 minutes later, she pulled into the driveway. She got out of the car carrying Luca, who was still in the white gown, and she was beaming. She handed him to me and said today was a beautiful day. I looked at the gown. I said, "What is this?" She said it was his baptismal gown. She said it had been in the family for 3 generations. She said Luca had been baptized that morning at St. Anthony's, and that Father Carmelo had welcomed him into the church, and that it had been a beautiful ceremony, and that now her grandson was protected. I did not speak for 10 seconds. I was doing the thing I always do when something terrible happens, which is try to make it make sense before I react. Then I understood it was not going to make sense. I said, "Renata, did you have my son baptized without my permission?" She said the church does not require the mother's permission when the grandmother vouches for Catholic upbringing. I said that is not how that works, and also we are his parents, not you. She said she had done what she believed was right for his soul. Marco had come out of the house by then and was standing behind me. He said, "Mom, what did you do?" She said, "I did what you failed to do. I protected him." Marco went very still. I have only seen Marco go still like that twice in 7 years. The first time was when his father died. The second time was now. He said in a quiet, controlled voice, "I need you to leave." She said, "I expected gratitude." He said, "Leave now." She said, "This is about faith." He said, "You deceived me and took my son without telling me where you were going. You had him baptized after we told you our decision. Leave." She looked at me with an expression that said this was my fault. Then she got in her car and drove away. Luca chewed on his fist and had no idea any of it had happened. Marco sat down on the front step and I sat next to him, and neither of us spoke for a while. Then he said, "I am so sorry." I said, "You did not know." He said I should have asked where she was taking him. I said we could not have predicted this. We sat there until Luca started to fuss, and then we went inside and fed him and put him down for a nap, and then we had the longest conversation of our marriage. What do we do? What does this mean legally? Can it be undone? What does it mean for her relationship with Luca going forward? I called the church the next morning. I asked to speak with Father Carmelo. He was apologetic in tone but firm in doctrine. He confirmed that Luca had been baptized. He said that the grandmother had attested to the child being raised Catholic. He said that in the eyes of the church the sacrament was valid. I asked what had been required for Renata to do this without both parents present. He said that Catholic canon allows for baptism to be performed when a responsible Catholic relative requests it, and attests to raising the child in the faith. He said they had not verified with the parents. I asked if he understood that neither parent had consented. He paused. He said he was sorry for any misunderstanding, and that he wished Renata had communicated with us beforehand. I said it was not a misunderstanding. It was deception. He said he understood my frustration. I asked if the baptism could be reversed. He said in the eyes of the church, no, that civil records would not reflect it. I thanked him and hung up, and then I called a lawyer. My friend's sister was a family lawyer. She said what Renata had done did not rise to a criminal level in our state, because the child had been returned safely, and no physical harm had occurred. She said it was, however, a profound overstep, and that we had grounds to pursue a formal no-contact order if Renata refused to acknowledge what she had done. She also said it was important that we document everything now before we did anything else. I spent 2 hours that afternoon writing out a full account. Date. Time. What Renata had told Marco. What she had said to me. The conversation with Father Carmelo. I saved it all. Then I did something that I had not done before, but that my instincts told me was necessary. I contacted St. Anthony's again, this time in writing by email, and asked them to note in their records that both parents had explicitly declined the baptism, and that it had been performed without parental consent. I asked them to retain any records of who had arranged it and what had been said. The church secretary responded that they would note my correspondence. Not an apology. Not an admission. Just a notation. But it was something in writing. Marco called his mother that evening. He told her what he told me she needed to hear, which was this. You entered our home under the pretense of helping. You took our son to a church without telling me where you were going. You had a religious ceremony performed on him that we had explicitly said we did not want. You lied to a priest by telling him we intended to raise him Catholic. You posted photos online without asking us. You framed this as doing us a favor. None of that is acceptable. Renata said she had done it out of love. Marco said love does not deceive. She said he was choosing his wife over his faith. He said he was choosing his child's parents over his mother's agenda. She said he would regret this. He said he already regretted not listening more carefully to Sofia's concerns about you from the beginning. That sentence hung in the air. Renata went silent. Then she said she needed to pray about this and hung up. We took Renata off the approved contact list at our pediatrician's office. We revoked her standing authorization to pick Luca up from anywhere. We put a note at his daycare that no one outside of the two of us was allowed to take him under any circumstances. We changed the code on our front door lock. Then Marco sent his mother a letter by email and certified mail simultaneously, so she could not claim she had not received it. The letter said that she was temporarily suspended from unsupervised visits, and that she was no longer authorized to take Luca anywhere without prior written agreement from both parents in each specific instance. It said that if she attempted to take him anywhere without that permission, we would seek a formal restraining order. It also said that she was required to remove the photos from Facebook within 48 hours, or we would report the posts to Facebook as unauthorized images of a minor. She removed the photos in 11 hours. We knew because our friend had been watching her page. She did not respond to the letter for 4 days. When she did, it was a long message about how she had prayed and consulted her priest, and that she believed God had moved through her, and she could not apologize for following God's direction. Marco forwarded it to our lawyer without responding. Our lawyer said this was useful documentation of her state of mind, and her refusal to acknowledge our parental authority. The weeks that followed were strange. The extended family fractured. Marco's aunt, who had been at the baptism and known about it in advance, called Marco and said Renata had been talking about doing this for months, and that she thought we would come around once it was done. She said she was sorry she had not warned us. Marco said he appreciated her saying so. Marco's cousin sent me a private message saying Renata had told the whole family that she had saved Luca's soul and that she was being persecuted by her daughter-in-law for it. The narrative she had built was one where she was the righteous victim. I did not engage with any of it. I just added everything to my document. 2 months after the baptism, Renata asked to see Luca. She did not apologize. She said she missed him, and that she hoped we could move past this. Marco said any visit had to include a conversation in person where she acknowledged what she had done. She agreed to come. She sat in our living room with Marco and me and Luca playing on the floor between us. She said she loved Luca very much. She said she had acted out of that love. She said she understood we were angry, but she did not regret protecting his soul. Marco said the issue is not whether you regret it. The issue is whether you understand that you do not have the authority to make that decision for our child. She said she had a moral obligation that transcended parental authority. I said then we have a problem. Because if you believe your moral obligations override our parental rights, we cannot trust you alone with our son. Renata looked at Luca. She looked at us. Something shifted in her face. Not full understanding, but the beginning of it. She said she would not do anything like that again without our agreement. Marco said we need more than that. He said he needed her to acknowledge in this room that what she did was wrong, not just in our view, but in the basic sense that she deceived him and took his son somewhere without telling him. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I should have told you. I should have asked. Marco said yes. She said, I was afraid you would say no. He said I would have said no. She said, I know. And she looked at Luca again, and I could see that she loved him in the way people love things they are also willing to damage to possess. That was not gone. But it was at least named now. We established a new agreement. All visits at our home or a public location. No outings without both parents present, or both parents in written agreement first. No religious activities of any kind involving Luca without our explicit approval. If any of these were violated once, contact would be suspended for 6 months. Renata agreed. She has visited 7 times since. She brings pasta and holds Luca and tells him stories in Italian. She does not take him anywhere. She has not mentioned baptism again. I watch her carefully every visit and probably always will. Marco says I am becoming more relaxed. He is right. Slowly. Because some trust can be rebuilt. Not all of it, but some. And some is enough when a child is watching. Here is my question for you. If your mother-in-law secretly baptized your baby without your consent and told you to be grateful, would you cut contact completely or give her the chance to rebuild trust? In TAYTASH or nah. Tell me what you would do because I read every single comment and you have no idea how much it helps to know we are not alone in this. What I did not mention yet is what happened at the extended family gathering 3 weeks after the baptism. Marco's uncle organized a Sunday lunch that had been on the calendar for months. We debated whether to go. In the end, we decided going was better than giving Renata a victory narrative where she could tell everyone we were sulking. We went. We brought Luca. We were polite. Renata arrived last. She walked in carrying a small gift bag and presented it to Luca in front of everyone. Inside was a tiny gold crucifix on a chain and a laminated copy of his baptism certificate with his name in ornate lettering. She held both up and said so that Luca always knows who he is. 40 people were watching. I felt Marco go rigid beside me. I took the items from her hand, placed them back in the bag, and said thank you for the thought. But we will decide what he knows about himself when he is old enough to decide. The room went very quiet. Renata's lip trembled. Her sister put a hand on her arm. An older cousin said something in Italian that I did not catch, but that Marco told me later meant she brought this on herself. Renata said nothing. She sat down at the table and ate in silence and left before dessert. Marco's aunt found me in the kitchen afterward and squeezed my hand and said you handled that perfectly. I did not feel like I had handled it perfectly. I felt like I was always performing some version of compose that I had to maintain because if I cracked for 1 second, she would use it against me. That is the exhausting part that nobody warns you about when you have a difficult mother-in-law. It is not the big events. It is the sustained performance, the constant recalibration of how much warmth is safe to show, how much firmness is necessary, how to hold a line without becoming someone you do not recognize. I have been performing composed since Luca was born. Since before that actually. Since the gender reveal when I saw her expression and felt the first edge of something wrong. That afternoon on the drive home, Luca fell asleep in his car seat, and Marco reached over and held my hand without saying anything. That was enough. It was more than enough. I started therapy the following week. Not because I was falling apart, but because I did not want to. My therapist, Dr. Elena, is the one who gave me a phrase I use now whenever I feel the performance slipping. She said your boundaries are not a punishment you are giving her. They are a structure you are building for your family. That refrain changed everything. I was not withholding Luca from Renata. I was building a structure that allowed Luca to know his grandmother without being used by her as a symbol of her own faith and identity. I was not being cruel. I was being an architect. That helped. The Facebook situation had a coda I did not mention earlier. After Renata removed the baptism photos, she posted a vague status update that said some people are so focused on control they forget what really matters. She had 43 comments from people in her circle, saying things like praying for you and stay strong, and God sees everything. She had coded me as the villain to her whole online community without naming me. I showed it to Marco. He called her and said if you continue making public posts that are clearly about our family, I will ask my lawyer to write to you. She deleted the post within 2 hours. Receipts. Always receipts. What I want every new mother reading this to understand is that the exhaustion of managing a difficult mother-in-law is real and valid, and it is not weakness to feel flattened by it. You are not being oversensitive. You are not failing at keeping the peace. You are doing the invisible labor of protecting your child's environment every single day. And that is one of the hardest and most thankless jobs in early parenthood. Keep your log. Keep your texts. Keep your emails. If your gut says something is wrong, it probably is. Your instincts as a parent are calibrated to your child's safety, and they are almost never wrong when they fire. And if someone tells you to be grateful after taking something from you without permission, that sentence alone is your answer about who they are and what they believe your role is. Grateful for a violation dressed as a gift. No, you do not owe gratitude for that. You owe your child a mother who knows the difference. I am still that mother. I will always be that mother. And Luca, when he is old enough, will decide everything for himself, including whether he wants a relationship with his grandmother. That decision will be his. Not hers. Not mine. His. I want to tell you about the night before I confronted Renata. I could not sleep. I kept going over every possible version of the conversation. The version where she cried immediately and apologized and everything became simple. The version where she doubled down and I had to stay cold and clear. The version where Marco wavered and I felt alone. I prepared for all of them. I wrote notes. Not a script but anchor points. Things I needed to say no matter what happened. The first one was this. You took our son somewhere without telling his father where you were going. That is not about faith. That is about honesty. The second was, the decision about his spiritual life belongs to his parents. That is not negotiable. The third was, what you did told us we cannot trust you alone with him. That is a consequence of your action, not a punishment we invented. I rehearsed those 3 points until they felt solid. When the actual conversation happened, none of it went the way I had imagined. It was messier and quieter and sadder than any version I had prepared for. That is always how it is when you are dealing with someone who genuinely believes they are right. You cannot argue someone out of righteousness with logic alone. You can only hold your ground, state your position, enforce your boundary, and let them make their choice. Renata made her choice by removing the photos, by showing up to the conversation Marco requested, by not doing it again. Those are small things. But small things compounded over time are what trust is built from when the large things have been broken. I am not saying this ends well for everyone. I know women who have been through similar situations where the grandmother never stopped, never acknowledged, never adjusted, where the boundary violations kept coming in new shapes, where the only safe answer was full no contact. I do not judge those women. I have been close enough to that edge to understand exactly why they are standing there. Our story ended differently only because Renata, underneath everything, loved Marco more than she loved being right. That love was the lever, not my composure, not the binder, not the lawyer's letter. Just the fact that when Marco said I am choosing my family over your agenda, something in her heard it and shifted. Not everyone has that lever available. If you do not, use the other tools. The binder, the lawyer, the restraining order, the no contact. Whatever it takes to keep your child safe and your family intact. You are allowed to use every single one of them without guilt. And you are allowed to protect your peace with the same ferocity that Renata used to try to take it. That is not revenge. That is parenting. One last thing. When Luca is old enough, I will tell him this story. Not to make him resent Renata, but to show him what it looks like when adults disagree about something important and handle it through conversation and documentation and courts instead of through silence or violence. I want him to know that his parents held a line for him before he could hold it himself. That we said, this is his life, his choice, his autonomy, even when he was 11 weeks old and could not yet hold his own head up. I want him to understand that love without consent is not love. That doing something to someone for their own good without their agreement is still something done to them. That you can be devout and still be wrong. That you can love deeply and still cause harm. And that when harm happens in a family, you name it, you document it, you address it, and then you decide how much space to leave for repair. We left space. Renata filled some of it. That is the story as it stands today. Messy, unresolved in some ways, but held. We are holding it. Every family that has been through something like this is holding something. I see you. I see all of you. There is a part of this story I have not told anyone outside of therapy. In the 3 days after Renata baptized Luca without our permission, I went through a period of intense self-doubt that I am not proud of. I kept asking myself whether I was making too much of it, whether I was being culturally insensitive to someone whose faith was the center of her entire life, whether my secular background was making me see malice where there was only love. I called my mother. She listened to everything. Then she said something I needed to hear. She said, "Sofia, the question is not whether Renata loves Luca. The question is whether she respects you as his mother. Those are two separate things, and one does not cancel out the other." That sentence cut through everything. Because yes, Renata loved Luca. But she had stood in our living room and handed Marco a baby in a baptismal gown and said she had done what we failed to do. That sentence, what you failed to do. She had looked at our considered, deliberate, respectful parenting choice and labeled it a failure. She had overridden it. She had used the 45 minutes Marco was on a work call to take our son to a church and make a permanent spiritual declaration on his behalf, and then present it to us as a gift. That is not love that went too far. That is someone who decided their judgment was more important than our authority. And the moment I named it that clearly, I stopped doubting myself. I went back to my notes. I added the sentence "what you failed to do" to the document with the date and time she had said it. I built the case not for a court, we never needed one, but for my own clarity. So that in the moments when I felt like I was being too harsh or too rigid or too unforgiving, I could read back through what had actually happened and remember that my boundaries were not a reaction to a feeling. They were a response to documented events. That documentation saved me. Not from Renata. From the version of myself that would have slowly given ground until there was no ground left. I see a lot of women in the comments of stories like mine who say they wish they had kept records from the beginning. Who say they dismissed the early incidents because each one seemed too small to matter. Who say that by the time they had a serious incident, they had no record of the pattern leading up to it. Start the record early. Start it when your gut first says something is off. Not because you are planning for war, but because clarity is a form of protection and documentation is a form of clarity. That is the practical thing I want you to take from this. The emotional thing is something softer. It is this: you are allowed to love your family and hold firm boundaries at the same time. These are not opposing forces. In fact, they require each other. Because the only sustainable way to remain in relationship with someone who has violated your trust is to have a structure strong enough that the violation cannot happen again. Without that structure, the relationship corrodes from underneath. With it, something can grow. Slowly, imperfectly, but it can grow. 7 visits in, Renata and Luca are building something real. She holds him and sings to him in Italian, and he grabs her silver bracelet and laughs. She brings him pasta and watches him eat it with enormous pride. She has not once in 7 visits mentioned baptism, faith, souls, or God in connection with Luca. Maybe she is biding her time. Maybe she has genuinely shifted. I cannot know for certain, and I have accepted that uncertainty. What I know is that right now, in this structure, something good is possible. And I am choosing to let it be possible while staying ready if it is not. That is the whole job. That is parenting and marriage and family, and all of it. Staying ready while choosing to believe something good is possible. I hope you are choosing the same. Thank you for being here.